I'm Chris Teague. I'm here moderating the session on National Disaster Response Preparedness, and this is the equipment panel. I personally have had a little bit of, I would say, evacuation experience this last year. I lived about 30 miles of the downstream of the Birriel Dam. Everybody remember that? I think it hit national news where they talked about the dam maybe breaking. So I actually had a very good friend of mine, I'm not going to mention any names and I'm not going to mention the department he works for, but yeah, let's just say he was on the inside information line of what was going on. He called me at about 4 o'clock Sunday afternoon, and I thought he just wanted to BS a little bit, but what he told me was, Chris, you need to pack your bags and leave now. And so I said, well, what's going on? He goes, yeah, the dam's not imminent, but leave now. So you know, you've had these little experiences in your life where you either know somebody who had a fire or someplace where you need to grab everything you have, what you could have, and you leave, right? And you've probably gone through that little exercise in your mind. Well, what do you think the first thing came to my mind to go do when I was told I need to leave now? Anybody? What would you do? You got to leave now. Well, what came to my mind was, gosh, I got to move my laundry from the washer to the dryer. Honest to God, that's what hit my mind, first thing I had to do. So my little tale, though, is I was not prepared. I was absolutely not prepared for that phone call. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Because state DOTs, when a disaster happens, you absolutely have to be prepared. So with that, I'd like to introduce our first panel member. He's going to give a presentation. And what I've asked the panel members to do is talk about specifically to their geographic area. So we're going to work from the East Coast over to the West. And we're going to start off in Florida with Angel Birriel. Angel is the mobile equipment manager for the Florida Department of Transportation.
Okay, so today's presentation is going to be about basically emergency fuel plan, service expectations of that emergency fuel plan, equipment, invoice reconciliation, lessons learned, and the numbers. Emergency fuel plan, background on this is, it was implemented in August of 2010 as a deliverable of the fuel card contract that we have in the state of Florida. The contract was issued with a requirement for the vendor to provide an emergency fuel plan that was going to be drafted with the state of Florida. It was not something that the fuel contractor, the credit card, actually it was a credit card contract, that they were going to bring it, here is completely done. It was going to be drafted between the state of Florida and the vendor. Next one is contractor and the state jointly develop the emergency plan, procedures for activation in the event of an emergency situation or order, to protect and recover critical assets and functions, and procedures for annual review, updating, altering, and writing the results in a document that's fully functional and operational. So those were the requirements on the contract that was issued in 2010. The contract was awarded to Wright Express, and Wright Express brought on board the company called Macro. I'm not sure if any of your states have used Macro Oil. They're based out of Louisiana, and basically they were the ones as subcontracted by Wright Express. Service expectation. What was expected was refuel underground and above ground fuel storage tanks, temporary fuel depots, like let's say we got a parking lot in Walmart that we could actually just take over and open a fuel station there. So they will bring tanker trucks that have pumps connected to the tanker truck, and they can actually dispense fuel from an 8,000 gallon tank. So it's not just, trailer mounted, we're talking big fuel trucks. So they have the capabilities for doing that too. Be able to do a 24-hour refueling at staging areas, especially, a rest area on the interstate. During an evacuation, sometimes people are running out of fuel. The commercial vendors may run out of fuel, and at that moment, then the DOT, in order to get the road moving, they actually have to keep the the site's operational. So that we brought fuel during the emergency that we had. We actually had fuel for our emergency responders to be able to actually get fuel at the rest areas. Evacuation support, refueling, and then also vehicle, generator, and equipment refueling. We had experiences in other years, in addition to this last year, that we have teams that were actually opening roads, and the nearest fuel site was about an hour. So in order to do that, we actually have fueling groups. It was the contractor will run with our crews, opening the roads and refuel with them. Equipment, the contractor provided is providing bobtail fleet ranging in capacity from 1,100 to 4,500 gallons. The bobtail convenience is that you can actually get it into a location that they can actually turn around on a road. Now you don't have a semi getting all crisscross trying to turn around on a small road. So we have bobtails chasing our crews and providing fuel to them. Transport trucks designed to pick up fuel from refinery terminals and deliver fuel to our storage tanks and resupply bobtail trucks. Same situation, if the bobtail truck cannot run to the fuel terminal because it's about an hour or 2 hours away from the location, they can actually have a transport truck chasing them, supplying them, and then let the transport truck go back and get another resupply. And then also mobile fueling trailers with fuel storage capacity of 8,500. So those are the tanker trailer trucks with the pumps connected. They are metered, and they actually are able to track the fuel as it's being dispensed. Also, mini mobile fueling stations and high water fuel trucks. There were areas that, like in Texas when Houston, that were high water, and some vehicles are not able to actually be deployed in those areas. Also, we have equipment for microwave communication towers that have generators, and those generators, in order to refuel them, they're so remote that they actually need a high water type equipment 4x4 to get to it. So they also provided that. The next part is, after everything is done, invoice reconciliation. We require for them to actually provide date of the transaction, the location, county of the transaction, because the fuel, the way it works in Florida and most of your states too, is that if you actually dispense fuel in county such and such, then there is a county tax that is applied to it. Even though we are tax exempt, federal tax exempt, we still got to pay the taxes for the county, also the state taxes. So that is something that we actually have to track. So location of the county, entity receiving the fuel. We dispense fuel to Red Cross, National Guard, utility companies, you name it, whoever came that was an emergency responded, we actually dispense fuel to them. The contractor had to, make sure that they can track and tell us, itemize, who they dispense the fuel, so that we can actually reconcile that and be able to actually charge back those entities that got fuel from us. The type of vehicle, equipment, the fuel type that they actually dispense, diesel, gasoline, aviation fuel. We have a little bit of everything. Gallons dispensed, the mission number, because sometimes they were actually under our emergency group actually will tie the event or the location where they're actually working with a mission number. So they needed to have that mission number so we can actually do the reconciliation of the invoice. Lessons learned. Invoice, don't wait until the end of the month when they're doing close to 4,000, 8,000 transactions a month. It's just, we prefer now to, that was a lesson learned that we did, is get the invoice on a weekly instead of a monthly. Invoice by county, due to the tax requirements, that was another issue. We had fuel transactions that, they couldn't tell us well what counties they were, so they had to actually go back and pinpoint what county they were actually dispensed, so they can actually tie the fuel tax for it, because they vary. They're not the same. A narrative description for the invoice, telling us, what actually happened in that time period, where they had the crews, things like that. Something basic, is not, too descriptive. And then additional staff, they actually have to add more staff to actually handle the transactions as they come back from the field to them. Because some of them, they were actually able to capture them electronically, but in other instances, they were actually tracking that information on a spreadsheet. And now somebody's actually, sending that to the headquarters of the contractor, and then from there, they're actually putting it in the complete invoice process. Also, field inspections, we're actually going to be out more often, checking on the contractor, do field inspection of the operations, so we can actually see that, yes, they deliver 8,000 gallons. It's this type of truck, it's a bobtail, or it's a trailer. They're running with the crew. Yes, it's tied to this mission. That way there is a one-to-one comparison. Not all the sites, but at least has some inspection. The numbers. The activation happened in September the 6th, 2017. That was last year for Irma. So it happens that Texas is actually being hit by Harvey. So they are a little bit busy over there. So it happens that the contractor, Macro Oil, actually was in Texas helping in, as that is happening, Irma is coming to us. So they actually completed operations there. They left some of their crew working in Texas, and they showed up in Florida, and they were ready for activation. September the 6th is when we activated them. The numbers of counties affected, we got 29 plus counties that were affected. At the end, we actually had not only Macro Oil, our emergency group, not on the DOT side, but on the emergency of the state side. They actually had contracted another company that is called Gardner. I'm not sure if you are familiar with Gardner, but they actually not only provide fuel, but they provide other emergency response, like for big disasters, and care and tents and other things, equipment. So Gardner was also in Florida helping. So we have two contractors. The total cost, labor, equipment, and fuel came out to be $33 million for probably 3 or 4 months of fueling. These are the areas where fueling missions happen in Florida. Even though the hurricane actually did not really crisscross us, it actually went on the coast. The wind loads and everything basically caused that much damage that you can see that there was fueling operations almost in the entire peninsula. These are the fueling depots: Camp Landing, Orange County Convention Center, Tampa Fairgrounds, Lee County, LSA, and Miami-Dade College. Those were actual depots that they actually were refueling from there. And then, these are the different events that happened. You got Harvey on August the 25th. You got Nate in Louisiana, Mississippi, October the 78th. You got Irma, September the 10th, when it actually touched Florida. And then Maria, Cat 4 in Puerto Rico, September the 20th. And actually, the folks from Macro Oil, as they were actually helping us in Florida, they were actually being deployed by FEMA to Puerto Rico. So they actually went to Puerto Rico, and they're still in Puerto Rico. You like to talk about snow and ice, but also how do you do with the snow and ice operations? Because you need fuel for those snow and ice, and it's not a plow that you need fuel to move that plow.
So I'm just curious, do you pay them if you don't have a disaster? In other words, do you pay them to have all this?
No, once the disaster activation is made, we get a letter from the governor authorizing, this, then basically we call them and they are on the clock. The minute they deploy equipment, personnel, that's when they're on the clock.
So they just have all this equipment, the waterboarding and everything, just because they've done it in the past?
And they provide services to other states too. But when something happens in Florida, they are under contract to come to us and aid us.
So if I was on the Florida Turnpike and I ran out of gas, would my gas be free if I filled up with gas?
There was that situation where people actually got free gas. We actually have road rangers, and they do provide free gas, water, and other things. On a situation like this, they were overwhelmed, but we had the road rangers activated, and they were out there providing, fuel.
Or would I pay could I fill up my car with a credit card at one of these fuel tanks?
The vendor's equipment is actually equipped to handle transactions by credit card. Not all of them, because they also were to the level that not all the trucks that were there, they were actually macro oil. They were subcontracted vendors too. So some of them did have the equipment that they can actually do a credit card transaction and be able to charge right there.
Angel, just curious, what would their response have been had your local depots shut down if they could not get fuel from your local racks?
Well, they actually provided fuel to our sites too, because we were not able to get fuel from our, traditional vendors because the terminals were closed due to, no power or winds or whatever. Basically, they actually provided fuel to us, to the state, on our DOT sites and also to hospitals and other locations.
Just curious, do you have any EPA containment requirements at these sites?
They are above ground sites, but you're talking about if they do like a Walmart parking lot, is that what you're talking about? Yeah, on the portables, yes, they basically do the same setup that they're required. They have a spill containment. They come, I don't know if you've seen these portable trailers that you actually can refuel a helicopter. Then they have it's like a neoprene mat with stands on the side that you can actually put it on the floor. You roll the trailer into it and then you put the stands. And basically, if there is a spill, everything is contained. It's basically the same thing, but they do it for an 8,000-gallon truck.
Okay, we're going to move west to Texas now. We have Dalton Pratt. Dalton has served as Director of the Fleet Operations Division at Texas Department of Transportation since 2013.
Good afternoon, everybody. Let me start off by giving just a little quick background on why this was a significant event other than just the sheer size of it. 5 years ago, Fleet Operations Division within TxDOT didn't exist. Okay, and shortly before that, fleets were done independently in each of the 25 districts. So we had 25 separate fleets. The fleet purchasing or oversight was embedded in purchasing itself and wasn't a clear-cut org chart. If you wanted to find somebody from fleet, you just had to know who handled fleet. And through some major changes, the Fleet Operations Division stood up. And this was our true, really first test. And some of you might remember that when we stood up, we went from over 16,000 pieces and we reduced in size significantly. And the hubbub in the field was, we'll never be able to respond to an emergency again. Okay? We're going to get caught with our pants down, is what they said. Fast forward 5 years, here we are getting ready for another hurricane season. And sure enough, we got tested. And in the meantime, we had some significant winter events. We had some pretty significant wildfires. We had a dam issue once. We thought the Tawakoni Dam was going to collapse, all 4 foot of it. Okay. So, anyway, if you remember in Harvey, Houston got the biggest press about it. Houston is the largest city in Texas, 4th largest city in the United States. It's got a population of about 2.3 million folks. This is what it looks like on a typical day. This is what it looked like during Harvey. Record rainfall, flooding, areas that's never flooded before. You talk to any of the locals, like your departments, most of the maintenance folks and the fleet folks are all local. They've lived there all their lives, okay? And they've never seen flooding like this before. It was amazing. Typically, when we plan for a hurricane season, the scenario is that we plan for is a hurricane in the Gulf and we don't know where it's going to hit. Okay, so we plan for each of the 4 coasts, or 4 divisions on the coast, plan for a hurricane hitting in their area, and knowing that it's only going to hit one, roll inbound, roll inland, lose its strength, and then the districts that don't get hit will come down and help support the district that does, as well as the rest of the state. That's the way we normally planned it. Harvey came in and hit landfall 3 different times. It basically rolled up the coast. We had no planning for that whatsoever. It was a pretty interesting. it formed right around the Yucatan Peninsula, and we were in the EOC, Emergency Operations Center. I was the second guy there right after the commander. And we were talking and said, this doesn't look like it's going to develop very much. And we said, well, it'd be a good time to practice our procedures anyway and get things started rolling out, just in case we ever have to do this for real. That's how it started. As a side note, the first landfall it almost hit directly on our Rockport maintenance section. Fortunately, we were evacuated because it leveled the section. Except there was a pickup truck that I had targeted that I wanted to get rid of for years. Okay. Matter of fact, when they evacuated, I said, please leave it there. Okay, so they left it in the shop. You know what happened. We got there, the shop was gone, the truck was there without a scratch. Okay. There you have it. So it rolled up the coast, they kind of rolled in, rolled back out, rolled back in. And we had significant rainfall all the way up. We got up to 60 inches of rain. That was so much rain that the Weather Center actually had to come up with a new color on their chart because their graphs that they use on their briefings didn't go up to 60 inches. Unfortunately, over 100 fatalities. And that's a pretty sobering thought. We had our fair share of TxDOT employees stranded. At work, surrounded by water. We had instances where they didn't have enough meds. Some of the folks are older. So we delivered medications in a 10-yard dump truck to some of those places, and it was dicey. Disaster declaration in 60 counties, 6 districts impacted. Everybody in the state responded in some way. Damages $150 billion. TxDOT cost to date is $88 million. $3 million of that was in fleet overtime alone. 32,000 Texans displaced in the shelters. Preparation. For my background, I've been very familiar with hurricane disaster response. Katrina and Rita, I was still in the Air Force. Marshalling C-17s in and out. I don't know if you recall that. I was in TxDOT for Hurricane Ike. Learned a lot of lessons just from my perspective that came into play for Harvey. Annual preparation, we have fleet has a very detailed SOP. We do tabletop exercises. Hurricane preparation is a year-round activity in fleet. We start early, making sure that we're prepared because we don't have a spin-up time like somebody else might. One of the first things that we did, and it was a lesson learned from the Hurricane Ike, was when we started rounding up equipment for Ike, more than one section, more than one group was counting on using the same haul truck or the same grade-off. And it became a very disorganized deal. So what we did is fleet, first thing we did is we took all the state's plans, put them together, and put actual equipment numbers on each need. That way we were ensuring we were not double tapping anywhere in the state. So we knew exactly how much equipment and how much we were going to have. NIMS training. Everybody from our supervisors and above has NIMS training at some level. The managers and above do the in-resident week-long course. A lot of lessons learned, and it also helps us interface with the rest of the responders. Predetermined flow of communication. One of the things that can happen in a big disaster response is a section going, hey, I need 2 more loaders, or I need a grade all. And 3 people from the same section ask for the same request, going up separately, and all of a sudden I'm sending 3 grade alls when we only need 1. That means there's another place that could use those grade alls that doesn't have it. So we nailed down our communication, funneled them up, kept our responses to what was actually needed, and we didn't know where to respond. It's an early fleet leadership presence at the EOC. Well, I don't know if it was a leadership presence, but I was there. It started off with 2 of us in the room, and you can see on the picture it got pretty crowded as we went forward. We were there for weeks responding to this long after it went off the news. Fleet is integral to everything that you do in this type of situation. And if you can see, I don't know if you can see or not from the crowds, everybody's laptop just about had our GPS coverage up, following whatever they were interested in, whatever they were tracking. One of the first things we did as a fleet division a few years earlier was to put GPS on every single piece of equipment that we had. We went from 0 GPS coverage to complete in just a matter of months, and it paid dividends. As the forecast came in, and we came to the realization this was going to be a major event, what we do in Texas is we stage all our equipment from the other parts of the state into 2 major areas, Bryant and San Antonio. And we move tons of equipment in, parts, people, whole 9 yards, and we stage them there and wait for the hurricane to actually coast in. We don't put them on the coast, we put them there, and then that way after it coasts in, we can respond to wherever we needed to go. So it cuts the response rate down. But what we did different this time, in previous hurricanes, Ike and before that, fleet was there before the equipment got there. We sent a ton of extra mechanics in, some managers, some admin. So when these convoys started showing up, and we were tracking them in with GPS, so we knew where they were at. When they showed up, we would meet them, tell them where to park, service their equipment, do any PMs that were due, fuel them. So all they had to do was get checked in and get rested. We ended up staying there a lot longer than everybody had thought because of the way this hurricane acted, where it rolled up the coast. And that's another caution I would give you, that if you over-respond early and send in too many folks, they all start and want to go home at the same time too. You start losing them, or they get tired. So we stayed busy doing repairs, getting everything squared away. We pre-rented the equipment where we felt we would need it, stuff like, nightstands, night lights, and pumps, and we basically rented up everything that we could find that we thought we might need, and got our hands on it, generators and stuff. And we had support from all 25 districts. To put that in perspective, we had folks from El Paso come out and help out during the hurricane. TxDOT, and if you're in El Paso, you're a whole lot closer to California than you are to Houston. So it was a lot of traveling, our equipment, and our folks were up to the task, I'm proud to say. We moved 1,200 pieces of equipment in, and that's in addition to the roughly 3,000 pieces of equipment that were already on the coast. 140 rental units, that's major pieces. The response stood down December 20, just right before Christmas. So this started at the very end of August, almost a year ago, and went up to Christmas, and that was just the hurricane response. After that, our debris removal lasted up until just a few weeks ago. Debris removal is a heart-wrenching deal. I was down in that area, drove through that area not long after we shut it down, the major hurricane response, and we're just strictly debris removal. And you drive through neighborhoods, and it's like driving through a canyon. It's just drywall, torn out of houses, appliances, toys, furniture. Their life's belongings are alongside the road, waiting for us to come pick them up in a dump truck. They can't get started until we go do that. It's pretty moving. I'm glad that we could do that. Glad that we were there to help. It was truly an all-hands-on-deck experience. Every day, everything down to even our office managers that would work all day, and then they would shuttle people movers, sedans, pickups around as needed. It was I was glad we could do it. As soon as we saw this was going to be a long-term deal, we started making sure that people had time off, or you knew when you were going off duty and how long before you had to come back. And then after a few weeks, we would start scheduling complete days off. Some guys, even if they were getting off every day, were getting a little burned out. You can only do so many 14-hour days in a row. We deployed to multiple locations within those districts. Some of them were isolated by water, and as the water receded, you could go in and then relieve those folks. We set up a program where guys would go out and do work during the day, operators, and we would send mobile mechanics out with them daily to repair things alongside the road. But at night, we had another complete staff. So as they came back in, they would refuel. We would meet them, get their write-ups, get their repairs that are needed, and work all night to get the equipment. So when they came in the next morning, the equipment was topped off, any repairs were made, and it was ready to go. That turned into a long-term operation, but it paid off very well. As opposed to Ike, during Ike, we just basically sent a mechanic with each convoy, and they were on their own when they left. They got parts where they could, and they did what they could. For lessons learned there, we really made much improvements for our people. Like I mentioned earlier, GPS really paid dividends. It was improved to give you situational awareness. Nothing is more frustrating to an operator in the field where you're constantly answering the phone, getting phone calls. Where you at? What you doing? When you going to be there? How's it going? With GPS, we were able to monitor their progress without bothering them, so they could concentrate on what they were doing, their job at hand. We had 24/7 support for, obviously for the operations center, but also for rentals. We had rental staff all night, so if you needed to rent any thing at 2 o'clock in the morning, you could get that done. We ended up, because it was a disaster, renting equipment for other agencies as well, since we were good at it. Different cities and municipalities would contact the state operations center, and it would funnel the request back to us, and we would get them what they needed. I have over 300 fleet employees. Roughly 85% of us were actively involved, and I'd submit the other 15% were doing something. A lot of hours spent on the response, and this is just fleet. Things that went well was being able to reach back across the state. The equipment was in good shape. We had not once in the EOC or in the field was a complaint that, well, we wish we had more fleet or a different fleet or a better fleet. We got constant compliments on how well our mechanics and our fleet managers and our supervisors were doing, keeping the right equipment in the field at the right time. The rental team, they were renting across the nation, not only in Texas. They could pull a rabbit out of the hat. They could. Staffing and equipment plan, all the planning that we did paid off. Even though we didn't follow our plan immensely, those of us who've been in different situations, most plans don't last. The first bullet goes past your head, okay? But it gave us a starting point, okay? It's easier to deviate from a plan and improve one than it is to start from scratch. That turned out very well. All the prep work paid off. Some things that really worked out well was our 10-yard dump trucks and our super bobcats for debris removal. 10-yard dump trucks, we used those from everything from high water rescue. I can get that another picture of that in here somewhere. To obviously debris removal. Teamwork, I am dang proud of everybody in TechStop, and I'm especially proud of all the fleet employees. There couldn't be any more prouder than me. There are some lessons learned. We're going to get in situations that you didn't plan for. Upper left picture is not a boat. That's a 10-yard dump truck hauling people out. Okay. We weren't trained for that. We weren't prepared for that. And our equipment wasn't ready for that. but we did it. We didn't have one break down. We changed a heck of a lot of oil and fluids afterwards, though. Teamwork was awesome, but lessons learned was more training in NIMS. We found some gaps there. More tracked equipment. Super Bobcats, we started off with debris removal using grade hauls, and it quickly turned out there was too tight an area to get a grade haul around and operate productively. The Super Bobcats turned out to be awesome. And we put grapples on them, and the tracked ones lasted longer, even though we wore out tracks as well. Better, that was a lesson learned, better key control. Yeah, when you have 1,200 trucks show up, and they're all, and you got them all the keys in the shoebox, sometimes it doesn't work out well. But we got through it, and we have plans now to do that better. We did not lose. Okay, we lost one piece of rental equipment. We still don't know where it's at. Okay, it was a sign. But we're going to designate we're calling them a rental rodeo cowboy or something. I don't know. Rental wrangler is what we're going to call them. But we're going to have somebody that's just basically making sure that we don't lose anything again. Preparation and check-in procedures. We could have done that better. We had a plan and we stuck to it pretty much, but there's some rooms for improvement there where those guys know more what to expect. I think they'll take it more serious for a while until this becomes a distant memory. But at the time when we were briefing them, it was like, well, this will never happen to me. And of course it did. Bring in administrative support earlier, and that means tendency is when the first starts flying is to, well, first thing you stop doing is paperwork. You just repair one thing, go to the next, repair it, go to the next, repair it, go to the next. Well, when you lose track of that, you're not sure what's been done, what needs to be done next sometimes, but also, more importantly, you don't know where you're going to get reimbursed. And it turns out to be a big chore to gather all that information. At the time, we're asking, like, well, you need to make sure that you write everything down. Well, that's the last thing we need to be doing. So we're going to send in next time, and we did it toward the end of this one, but next time, we're going to send administration support in with mechanics. And they're just going to keep track of things. Because we've already been reimbursed substantially for parts of this because we were ready. Bring that earlier. And also, we've got a work center app that's on the smartphones. All our mechanics have smartphones that we issue them anyway. And that's turning out to be greatly reduces the time away from wrench training. Or you can just log in from one job to the next, just a couple of clicks. Getting tire and maintenance contracts in earlier. We actually got a tire contract pretty early. We could have had one ready to go from the inception. Tires, you go through tires every day. I mean, when you get in this type of environment, if you're not careful, that's all you're going to be doing. I'd like to finish this up by saying that equipment held up great, tons of positive response from the citizens, from administration, from legislature, but I'm most proud of the folks, the guys, the TxDOT guys that went out there. Not only fleet employees, but all of them. Most of them on the coast had families with issues, and yet they're at work. It makes you want to do more for them, to give them a chance to do that. And when I say send more people in early, try to give the local mechanics a chance to go home and make sure their families are safe. Guys with their houses were devastated and they're at work. Questions?
Dalton, this question probably will apply in Angel's situation as well. Did y'all find it necessary to use any contract security forces in some of the areas you were staging out of?
We didn't. Fleet didn't. If there was some there, I wasn't aware of them. We didn't have any reports of that at our area, but there was some reports of that going on, especially in Houston.
Yes. For us, since it was fuel, we had escorts coming in, and we didn't want the fuel to end up going somewhere else because everybody had a need. So we actually have escorts by the local sheriff or FHP, Highway Patrol, in those areas that do need an escort. So we did have, but that was coordinated with the ESF group.
Okay, we're going to work our way west a little further. We're going to hit Colorado. Chris Volkert, Colorado. Chris is the Equipment Asset Manager for CDOT, managing the Equipment Services Unit of the Division of Highway Maintenance in Denver, Colorado.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. Okay, so just a little background on Colorado. Most people are probably familiar with the Rocky Mountains. You know, it's very steep terrain, a lot of trees, a lot of pine trees, and very rough conditions to respond to any type of natural disaster. We don't have to deal with the hurricanes, but what we do deal with is fires and occasional floods. You know, a lot of people wouldn't normally associate Colorado with flooding, but it does happen. So that's going to be the focus of the talking points I have for us today. We've had some recent incidents in the past few years that provide some pretty good perspective on emergency operations and how the fleet applies to that. A couple of background points here. First of all, CDOT participates in what's called the Rocky Mountain Area Interagency Program. So that's your usual suspects: the National Forest Service, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, local agencies, federal agencies such as FEMA, Homeland Security, depending on what the situation is, law enforcement, and the wildland firefighters. So we support that program as well. We do have on staff, we actually have an Office of Emergency Management that has a director and some staff that goes out there to assist and aid with any type of natural disasters that might happen. And we also have the incident managers. Their primary focus would be normally a highway accident or something of that nature, but they're also capable and trained of going out to assist with these type of incidents. Recent history, this one, some of you may have seen on national news. We had what they call the 2013 Front Range flood. That was in the area from north of Denver, which is Fort Collins, all the way down to central Colorado, which is Colorado Springs. In a very short period of time, they received 17 inches of rain. It affected 17 counties. There were 8 fatalities. 19,000 homes were damaged or destroyed, or damaged rather. 15,000 were destroyed. 30 bridges were washed out. 20 bridges received serious damage. A lot of roads washed out, railroads. One of the big concerns was fracking wells got flooded. That's already a controversial issue, but you throw a natural disaster at it and people get really excited about that. Big impact on agriculture, and a lot, release of hazardous sewage out into the water table and petroleum leaks. So those are some of the things that you deal with when you have massive flooding. I'm sure my colleagues here are well aware of that. The other big issues we've had the past few years are forest fires. We have fires every year. I think almost every western state does. The question is, how bad is the fire going to be? To lend a little context to that, I'm sure everybody in the room has seen Smokey the Bear commercials when they're growing up, right? So for the past 100+ years, our method of fire prevention was, don't start the fire in the first place, but if it does happen, put it out as quick as you can. Even if it was started naturally, put it out as quick as you can, because we want to keep our forest. Well, we're kind of too successful at that, because now our forests are so thick and so full of deadfall and fuels that when a fire does happen now, it's almost impossible to stop it in some cases. And it's not just a fire anymore, it's a mega fire. So much harder to deal with. The largest one we had in our recent history was the Hayman fire back in 2002, and that burned over 137,000 acres. So that was the largest fire, but the most destructive fire was more recently in Black Forest, which is north of Colorado Springs, and that destroyed 488 homes. And we've had 32 large fires since 2010. Currently we have 3 that are actively burning right now. How does CDOT prepare to support these fires or flooding incidents that happen? We're always ready to assist, just by the nature of being CDOT, who we are and what we do. But we do have regional leadership is involved with planning the what-ifs. So what equipment sets do we have on standby, ready to go on call as needed, and they're prepared to provide those along with the equipment operators that go with them. The equipment sets that we keep ready and on for short call notice is bulldozers, and those are used to cut fire line, reestablish roads, remove debris, road graders for the same purpose, water tankers and trailers, and of course tractor trailers and lowboys to haul that heavy equipment. And then we can assist with other equipment as needed. We're involved in what's called ROS, which is the resource ordering and status system. And that's something that the wildland firefighting forces use to request equipment from other agencies. So they can put in that request and the word gets out to the right people, and then those resources can be applied when and where needed. Other equipment we provide, probably much like all of you, we have the same types of equipment: loaders, excavators, backhoes, generators, light plants, variable message boards. In case I forget to mention it during lessons learned, Paul and I learned this past fire that we dealt with, your variable message boards. Probably a good idea to put GPS trackers on them, because when stuff like this happens and you've got multiple municipalities or counties or other agencies out there trying to respond to the incident, it's pretty much a free-for-all on VMS boards. If you leave yours sitting there because you want to convey a message to the public, well, I have to convey a message to the public too, and I'm fresh out of VMS boards and you're not watching, so I'm taking yours. So at least you can find your VMS board when it's all over. Just some notes on past responses. During the Front Range flood, we actually had such a requirement to move debris that we had items in our auction yard, dump trucks specifically, that were still in halfway decent shape and able to go towards that cause and help. So we pulled some of those assets out of our auction yard and applied them to the Boulder Canyon to help remove some of that debris and get things opened up again. Cooperation with the National Guard. That was something that was kind of new for CDOT when this flooding happened around Boulder. The Army National Guard has engineering capacity, so they have a lot of heavy equipment, and they have quite a few personnel to operate that heavy equipment. And that was great to have that partnership with them, but what we found is that they needed some training when it comes to rebuilding roadways and responding to incidents like floods, because in their normal job they're not really doing those kinds of tasks. They're more putting up obstacles or blowing things up or doing things to impede the enemy's progress. So this was a little backwards from what they're normally trained to do. So our CDOT equipment operators worked really closely with them to get them quickly up to speed on what we needed them to help us with. But it was great that we had those extra resources to help. Even though these guys mentioned it earlier, even though it's an emergency, there's still bills to be paid. We learned that same lesson. It's very important to keep account of the fuel you give out to other agencies, any other resources, rental rates for your equipment out to other agencies. All that paperwork, all that accounting still has to be done, because oftentimes there's federal monies involved in that from FEMA or other agencies that you have to account for. And after everybody high-fives each other when the incident's over and, hey, we did a great job, then the accountants and the auditors come in to make sure everything is done correctly. Notes particular to equipment. This highlights the need for a very good preventive maintenance program. If you don't do a good job on PM, when that call comes, you want to be the guy that provides the bulldozer that breaks down 1 hour into the operation, and then everybody's scrambling to find another bulldozer. The lesson learned is make sure your PM program is solid. The operators and mechanics have to be diligent in maintaining the equipment during the operations. So as our friend from Texas here mentioned, have a good maintenance cycle, good daily maintenance cycle. And then there's also your after-action maintenance. When it's all said and done with, change everything: filters, fluids, a good thorough inspection on the equipment, clean it up, do a good inspection on it, and get everything ready for next time. I just got some notes in from one of our emergency managers that I'll share with you. He just gave me some feedback from the last fire that they just got finally under 100% containment. And so I asked him for kind of a quick couple of thoughts on what was important in his experience up to and including today. And he highlighted the need for a mechanic to be assigned to the incident. If you have equipment there, you have to have a mechanic assigned to it. The need for fuel, having a fuel truck and fuel cards available, just in case you can't get to a local gas station or there's no bulk fuel capability right there, your own organic bulk fuel. You have to think about logistics for any people that you send to support that event. Where are they going to sleep? Where are they going to get their food? Where are they going to get their water? Who's taking care of that? If it's not you, who is it going to be? And coordinate that as quickly as possible. He reiterates working closely with your finance office and Homeland Security or whoever it is that that you're working with to make sure that all the accounting and bill payment gets done properly.
Last but certainly not least, Lisa Kunzman from California.
I'm going to talk about emergency response and focusing on the fleet support and lessons learned. And many of the things you already heard, I'll maybe touch on, and I'll try to concentrate what I'm going to speak about on things that haven't already been mentioned, possibly. I'm going to talk about two disasters that are fairly recent that we, in particular, in our response to that. So in Southern California, you may have heard about the mudslide on Highway 101. Kind of down in the southern blob down here is where this incident happened. Almost on the border of the county between Santa Barbara County and Ventura County is where this particular disaster hit. And it really started the year prior with the Thomas Fire, and I'll show you a slide about the Thomas Fire. And then this is really just so you can kind of get your bearings about where we're talking about, the Montecito mudslide. And then I'll also talk a little bit about the northern fires. This is happened last October, and literally this whole area in here is just on fire all over the place. This is where our wine comes from. So Napa County, Sonoma County, Santa Rosa, several fires in that particular area. So that's the Northern California. Seems like every fire we hear that this is the worst one in history. 2017 was basically a record year. I was talking to the representative from Delaware earlier, and I said, I'm going to mention you on my slide. So in 2017, 1.3 million acres in California burned, and that's the size of the state of Delaware. On this slide, the first 4 bullets here, some roads closed for 16 days, the 42 miles that were impacted on the highway, and those specific routes that were closed. Those were all things that happened with those Northern California fires in October of last year. We're finding that when we have fires, we're subject to mudslides after, and that these wildfires are becoming just really a top concern of ours. So here's a very stark picture of the city of Santa Rosa and the devastation that happened with the Tubbs fire. What's startling about the Santa Rosa fire is this is a town, any town USA. It's not necessarily up in the mountains or on near a forest. I mean, it's just a regular town. And the devastation that happened there, it just looked like a bomb went off there. It went so fast, and 22 people were killed in this fire. Massive damage to the town of Santa Rosa. My brother-in-law works for the city of Santa Rosa, and getting the infrastructure and the water and the sewage systems back up, it's been a huge job. And my husband is from Santa Rosa, and we go over there for Thanksgiving, and we drive through this area, and it's, like you were saying, it's heart-wrenching to see people's homes and lives really destroyed. To give you a little bit of idea about the Thomas Fire, the Thomas Fire was the largest fire in California. Almost 300,000 acres burned, and you can kind of get a relative feel for how big this fire was. This is overlaid with New York City. It burned all this hillside. You'll see this in the next slide. After we had that area burned, then we had 4 inches of rain over a 2-day period. And this is the slide area and the debris field. We had, again, over 20 people killed in this disaster. 2 people still remain missing and quite unexpected. This is what the highway looked like. And this is Highway 101, which is a major route going kind of up the coast. It's a divided highway, not just a 2-lane highway. And it was shut down for 12 days. Quite an operation to get that open and cleaned up. So the type of equipment that was used in these disasters, the ones that are underlined there are the ones that we were specific really to each of these. Like catch basin cleaners were something we took stuff off our sail line to send them down there. They came in from all around the state. We had rentals for those. We had actually cities and counties were asking for those from us, and we couldn't supply them because we needed them ourselves. In the fires, of course, we're losing guardrail and signs and a lot of tree damage, so trees and guardrail trucks and chippers and light towers. So some of the unique circumstances with the slide, one of the things that really slowed down the operation is that the material that was taken out was taken to the fairgrounds in Ventura County to bring in cadaver dogs to look for human remains. So that really, that was something unique about that. Again, I already said it was a major highway. And the other challenge was the material was very soupy. It was almost like loading liquid. So that was a particular challenge. And the other thing about that is when we're hauling the material out of there, it's leaving a huge mess on the city and county roads, and we had to go back and clean up after ourselves. With the Northern California fires, I mentioned there were multiple fires going on at the same time. We considered doing contraflow. We've never done that in California, but in order to evacuate all those people that are in the Northern California area, they really would have had to come towards Sacramento from the Bay Area. So we considered doing contraflow, but we didn't pull the trigger on that, even though there were mass evacuations in that area. And even if you weren't evacuated or in danger, the air quality was so bad that many people had to evacuate due to the air quality. So some lessons learned. One of the things that we found is that the districts are, in particular with the slide, is that the district felt like they could handle this or wanted to take ownership of it, which is great and all, but they really should have asked for help earlier. And so kind of headquarters kind of inserted themselves into the process to give them some extra help. Another lessons learned is like we were following our procurement rules like we do every day. And I heard of an instance where a maintenance supervisor needed like some hot mix. I'm not sure why, but he was like, I need more, but my credit card limit is this, so I'm only going to get this much. Well, all he really needs to do is call up the contracting office and say, it's an emergency, I need my card increased. And talking to our equipment superintendent, again, there's kind of this tendency of, I don't want to be a burden on the emergency, so I'm going to try to take care of myself. What we need to do, just like you were talking about, is communicate our needs to the emergency services folks on what we need for food and shelter and water. It's kind of a funny story that lessons learned hasn't quite been learned, and I'll talk about that later. But we should plan ahead for food, shelter, and water ahead of time. And that this kind of extreme weather seems to be our norm. In California, we are capped on the number of cell phones we have. Our governor is noted for being quite frugal, and when he came into office, he had an executive order that we reduce the number of cell phones, so we have like this cap, right? Well, one of the things we've learned is like in a disaster is it's okay for us to go and get burner phones or some disposable phones if that's what we need. What went well, what were non-issues? When I talked to the equipment superintendents, there was no major breakdowns, but when I talked to maintenance, there were major breakdowns. So that's maybe a perception issue, but we had no major fuel problems, or even with the air quality, we didn't have air filter problems with our equipment or tires. Teamwork was one of the things that went well, and the use of our GPS, situational awareness, and knowing the ETA of when our equipment was going to get there. And even we had people coming in from that area to help, and they don't really know where they need to be, so actually using that for navigation was something that went well. And I took this next bullet, I took this quote right out of an email that was sent to me, that when they called for help from another district, no questions asked. What do you need? We're going to send it. And another tool that served us well in both of these situations was having a live video feed of what was going on at the situation. Although at the mudslide, when they would come across some remains, they would turn that off. So good ideas, old and new. So Chris and I were preparing to leave last Thursday, Friday is when the Reading fire was happening. And we're starting to get ourselves ready in fleet to send mechanics north if we need be, especially for the demobilization. So this is a simple thing, and I can't believe we didn't already have this, but basically a list of volunteers. Where you're willing to go, where your home base is, what your classification is, how long you're willing to go. So we're putting together this list of volunteers. Our shop in Reading was out of power, and they were arranging for some generator power. This was Chris's response to that email that day. Well, if we don't have emergency generators at our shops, we should at least have generator-ready power connections. So these are new good ideas. And then having power storage, either solar or fuel cell. We have some solar arcs, which are EV chargers, but they also are portable and they store power, so if power goes out. And then literally I was at my desk with this PowerPoint up, getting ready, asking one of our superintendents for some old good ideas. And he comes into my office and he's telling me about how we're getting ready to send mechanics to Reading. And I said, well, you better make sure they have a place to stay. And he goes, yeah, we've already called and all the hotels are booked. And I'm like, well, why don't you call OES from the lessons learned that's on 4 slides ago? I literally clicked back to him. I said, remember we talked about this. Why don't you contact OES right now and make arrangements for shelter for them? So sometimes when we say lessons learned, we even forget them. So some old good ideas, and I'll just mention these. You kind of take for granted what you do in your own organization. We have business continuity plans. If we lose the main shop in Reading, where are mechanics going to go? And so we have these continuity plans of how we're going to disperse. We also, we know in fleet that, especially with the fires, that at some point all these people are going to have to go home. And the fire trucks that come in from all over the place, they cannot leave the incident until they've had an inspection on their vehicle. And so this is actually something we like to do. It's satisfying and we do it well and we know it's coming. And so we anticipate when we need to have mechanics there to do that final inspection so those guys can go home. And they're very appreciative of us doing whatever little repair that we need to do so they can hit the road and get home. And 2 other things I don't have on this slide, and I was asking Chris if we have anything like this. This goes back to before the internet. We have a Caltrans Highway Information Network. It was a 1-800 number. We still have it. And you punch in the route that you're interested about, and it will tell you if the road's closed or construction or whatever. Well, years ago we co-opted that and we use it for employee notification. You call that 1-800 number, you punch in 999, and it will tell you if your district if you're on essential duty that you need to come in, or if you're to stay home in your particular county. So we use that now. We still have the 1-800 number, but we also have it on the website. The first instruction really is to call your supervisor, but if you can't get a hold of them because they're evacuated or whatever, you can call that 1-800 number or check the website. And the other thing I'm going to mention in terms of old good ideas is we have a nonprofit that was formed. It's the California Transportation Foundation. And this organization provides scholarships, but also when it's in times like this, like with the Santa Rosa fires, we know our own employees lost their home. And I've heard that in the Reading fire that some of our employees have lost their home. Well, this organization provides some assistance to those employees, and they put out a campaign through the organization. They say, if you want to make a donation, because it's a nonprofit, it's tax deductible, you make the donation, you write right in the memo what you want it to be for, the car fire incident or the Northern California incident. So that's kind of something that we've had in place that it's a good idea that we use. We still have wildfires. I went to the CAL FIRE website the day I was preparing this. I think this was either Thursday or Friday. And so we get kind of numb to these things. People were asking me about the Reading fire, which would be about 3 hours north of Sacramento, right up in here. But we have all of these other fires continuous or going concurrently right now.
Do you identify your emergency equipment, and do you put special priorities on the PM of it and the repair of it, knowing that you're going into hurricane season, knowing that you're going into fire season? Do we prioritize that?
What we did is during that exercise where we identified by equipment number, each piece of equipment that would be used during the hurricane.
We also put a decal on the window that says hurricane response. And that way it has priority PM or anything like that as it approaches. So in short answer is yes.
So our Office of Emergency Management have worked with the regions, and they've identified specific unit numbers that are on deck to go in if something does happen. And then that's the first wave of response, and then after that, the situation dictates how much more we provide.
In Florida, we have utilization requirements for the fleet, and those vehicles that are actually used for emergency response or our mission support are actually identified, and they actually are excluded from the utilization requirements. But, in a moment of emergency, a report can be run and they can be identified.
Similarly, we have equipment that's designated as emergency response and utilization requirements. And one of that equipment is identified, and at a minimum, it needs to have a pre-operational check every 30 days. So at least we identify if the battery is dead, and then that the using department can notify the shop.
Thanks. Do any of you have equipment in your fleet or have been asked to put equipment in your fleet solely for the purpose of emergency response? We in Kansas have been asked to do some of that. It doesn't really fit into our mission. Example of that is we used to have a lot of water transport trucks, and we were asked to transport water a lot. We really haven't been using them. We've gotten rid of them and had received some pressure to maybe put those back in our fleet. Just curious about your response on that.
For Florida, we actually don't have, the snow and ice situations like the other states have, northern states. But we actually have plows, and we have spreaders, and we have a couple of other snow and ice equipment in the Panhandle area only. And sometimes it could be a year or 2 years without any action at all. But they are in the inventory, and they are maintained and kept up.
About the only thing that kind of comes to mind for me is the emergency communication equipment we have, like the satellite live feed video. We used to have some mobile command centers, but I believe we've got those out of the fleet. That's kind of specific to emergency response.
Thank our panel. That's great information. Sorry it took a little bit longer.
The preceding was produced by the National Center for Pavement Preservation. More information can be found on the web at pavementpreservation.org. Additional support provided by Michigan State University.